Once upon a time, in a faraway land, there was a poor shoemaker who was barely scraping by. His small shop on the outskirts of town was filled with the tools of his trade, but these days they were gathering dust. No one came into his shop anymore. Instead, they went to the big mall on the other side of town, where cheap mass-produced shoes lined the shelves. It was the same story all over the world. Big business was swallowing up the little guy. The shoemaker felt like just throwing in the towel, but something kept him going. A stubborn kind of pride, maybe, or a reluctance to give in. He loved his work, and he didn't want to be a quitter. So day after day, week after week, he kept going, even if it meant working late into the night. Then one night, something magical happened. The shoemaker had put out his tools and was ready to go home for the night, but he noticed there was still one last pair of shoes to finish. He sighed and got back to work, but after just a few minutes, he stopped what he was doing. Why bother? I thought to himself. They're not going to sell anyway. So he left the shoes half-finished and locked up for the night. The next morning, the shoemaker arrived at the shop bright and early and unlocked the door. He looked around for a moment, then rushed over to the half-finished shoes. Someone had finished them while he'd been gone. And not just someone very skilled, because these shoes were unlike anything he'd ever seen before. The leather was supple and strong, yet flexible and soft. The stitching was perfect, and the soles were thick and durable. He picked up the shoes and put them on. They fit perfectly. He looked down at his feet and saw that they were no longer worn and dusty, but fresh and new. A smile spread across his face. He knew he wasn't dreaming. He could feel the rough texture of the leather against his skin and the squeak of the new soles on the wooden floor. He spent the day showing off his miraculous shoes to anyone who would listen, but none of them wanted to buy them. They were too expensive. The shoemaker was about to give up hope when suddenly an idea struck him. He took the shoes back to the shop and spent the next few days making copies of them. He worked tirelessly, but he was happy to do so. These shoes were different. They were handmade with love, and people could feel it. They were sturdy, reliable, and comfortable. And before long, customers were lining up outside the shop, eager to get their hands on a pair. The shoemaker was finally making enough money to support himself and his family. He was so happy that he decided to make a pair of shoes for everyone in town, regardless of whether they could afford them or not. One day, while he was working away happily, he heard a knock at the door. He looked up and saw a beautiful woman standing in front of him. She introduced herself as the Queen of the Elves and explained that she and her people had been watching over the shoemaker. Impressed by his skill and dedication, they had decided to help him. Every night while he slept, they would come into the shop and work on his shoes, helping him produce the finest footwear in the kingdom. The shoemaker was overjoyed. He thanked the queen and her people for their help and promised to never forget them. And so it was that the shoemaker and the elves continued to work together, bringing joy and comfort to the people of the kingdom. Their partnership was a testament to the power of hard work, dedication, and the magic that happens when we least expect it. There once was a cobbler who lived in a small cottage on the edge of a dark and gloomy wood. He was a solitary man who kept to himself, and his only company was the sound of his hammer as he worked. The cobbler made fine shoes, and though he had few customers, he took pride in his work. Each shoe was a masterpiece, crafted with the utmost care and precision. One day, as the cobbler sat in his workshop, he heard a knock at the door. He looked up and saw a strange sight before him. Standing in his doorway were 4 little men, no taller than his knee, dressed in robes and pointed hats. The cobbler was startled, but he quickly recovered his composure and invited the little men in. They introduced themselves as elves, and they told the cobbler that they had come from the forest to learn the art of shoemaking. The cobbler was intrigued, and he agreed to teach the elves what he knew. For several weeks, the cobbler taught the elves the secrets of his trade. He showed them how to cut and stitch leather, how to shape and polish shoes, and how to make each shoe as unique as the person who wore it. In return, the elves entertained the cobbler with stories of the forest and its wonders. They told him of magical creatures and enchanted places, and they sang him songs that were as sweet as birdsong. As the weeks turned into months, the elves became more than just students. They were friends. The cobbler had never felt so connected to anyone, and he found himself looking forward to their lessons each day. But as the seasons changed and the leaves began to fall, the elves announced that it was time for them to return to the forest. They thanked the cobbler for his teachings and promised to never forget him. and with that they vanished into the trees. The cobbler was sad to see his friends go, but he understood that they had a life in the forest to return to. He missed their laughter and their stories, but he knew that he would see them again someday. And so the cobbler continued with his life, working in his shop and waiting for the day when the elves would return. Every night as the sun went down and the shadows grew long, he would sit by his fire and dream of the forest and its wonders. He would remember the laughter of the elves and the magic they had brought into his life. And he knew that as long as he held on to those memories, the elves would always be with him. One day as the cobbler was working in his shop, he heard a familiar knock at the door. He looked up and saw the 4 elves standing in his doorway, their eyes twinkling with mischief. The cobbler was overjoyed. He had missed his friends so much, and he couldn't believe they had returned. The elves had come back to see their old friend, and they had brought a surprise with them. They had come to take the cobbler on a journey to the heart of the forest, where he would see wonders that would make his heart sing. The cobbler didn't hesitate. He dropped his tools and followed the elves out of the shop and into the trees. As they walked, the elves told the cobbler that they had a special gift for him. They had saved up their forest magic over the past year, and they were going to use it to grant the cobbler a wish. The cobbler was touched by their generosity, and he knew that whatever wish he asked for would be granted with love and kindness. At last, they reached the center of the forest, where a clearing bathed in sunlight lay before them. In the middle of the clearing was a magnificent tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like arms. This was the heart tree of the forest, and it was here that the elves performed their most powerful magic.
Oh!
The cobbler stood in awe as the elves gathered around the tree and began to chant. Their voices were like the music of the forest, and their magic was like the wind through the leaves. As they chanted, the cobbler felt a surge of energy course through him, and he knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for. When the elves finished their chant, they turned to the cobbler and asked him what his wish was. The cobbler thought for a moment. He had many wishes he could have asked for, but he knew that the elves had given him a great gift, and he didn't want to waste it. Then he had an idea. He looked at the heart tree and asked the elves to use their magic to make the tree bear fruit. The elves were delighted with this wish, and they set about making it come true. As they worked, the tree began to glow, and soon the cobbler was surrounded by the most beautiful fruit he had ever seen. The fruits were all colors of the rainbow, and they shimmered like jewels in the sunlight. The cobbler was overjoyed. He knew that these fruits would bring joy and wonder to the people of the forest, and he was honored to be a part of it. As the elves finished their task, they told the cobbler that he had made them proud. They had seen how generous and kind he was, and they knew that he would use this gift wisely. With that, they disappeared into the trees, leaving the cobbler alone in the clearing. The cobbler spent the day picking the fruits from the heart tree, and he took them back to his village. He shared the fruits with everyone, and the people were filled with wonder and delight. The cobbler had done something truly special, and he knew that the elves had chosen him for a reason. He had used his gift to bring happiness to others, and that was the greatest reward of all. From that day on, the cobbler was known throughout the land as the elf's friend, and he lived out the rest of his days knowing that he had made the elves proud.